One thing I did want to ask you about was being on a calorie deficit as a female. And I wanted to
Mhm.
ask you maybe how to do that. But I think I want to flip the question a little bit and
Yeah.
ask you, what are some of the, maybe I'll use the word worst. What are some of the worst things you can do as a female if you're wanting to lose weight and go on a calorie deficit in regards to maintaining healthy hormone levels?
Mm. So the first one, in case you haven't picked up, listeners, I'm not a huge fan of fasting, intermittent fasting.
Mhm.
I love the overnight fast. So again, and I will just context this with the fact that this is for women in their menstruating years. I'm
Mm.
hoping people pre-menstruation, like pre-puberty, aren't dieting.
No.
Those ones after puberty, after menopause, your hormones have pretty much gone back to being what they were before puberty in a slightly different way. And they're kind of like how men are. So you can, if you need to, sensitize yourself to insulin again. Intermittent fasting can be fantastic. So there's a place for everything, in my opinion, and it's really based on what the individual needs. But to answer your question, intermittent fasting during your your menstruating years can be really, really horrific for dysregulating your hormones. And so if you're going to be in a calorie deficit, you are better to eat breakfast, lunch, dinner, and maybe a snack, just in smaller portions over the course of the day as opposed to doing that fasting. And the other big thing, and it's something that I did for a number of years, was to cut out majority of the fats, right? One of the easiest ways
Mm.
to shift weight is to drop a lot of the fats. We actually need about 30% of our calories to be coming from our fats because the fats help produce our hormones. And so you shut those off, you shut the production of those off, you're going to end up with a whole host of symptoms and issues and imbalances. So those are probably honestly the two key ones that I see people
Mm.
doing and then messing up their hormones as a result, and then struggling to get their hormones back online, particularly if they then want to fall pregnant or if they are trying to even just manage their weight. So, yeah, making sure that they're eating enough as well. So, a toddler eats around 1,200 calories, yet the amount of girls I've been spoken to or worked with in the past or still work with that come to me and they're like, yeah, so, I got down to like 1,400 calories. And I'm
Why?
like,
Yeah. And what about in terms of, I'm thinking about this in two separate parts, like going from not being on a calorie deficit to going on to a really aggressive calorie deficit being part one, and part two, the duration of a calorie deficit, meaning like you're on a deficit for 20 weeks. I assume
Mhm.
that's probably too long, depending again on the individual. But is there any kind of way that you approach it, like not going too much too soon, not going too long? Like, how do you approach those kind of aspects of it?
Yeah, I think ultimately, I guess if people are wanting to be in a calorie deficit, if we take the average person, right, not someone competing in a bodybuilding show, because that's going to be a
Yeah.
whole different kettle of fish.
Different. Yep.
Um, Most people obviously going into a calorie deficit are trying to shift some weight, and so for me, I actually recommend figuring out why the weight is shifting first. Is there
Mm.
an insulin resistance? Is there a gut issue? Is there something deep? Is the liver not functioning effectively? You can't clear out your toxins, and as a result, you're holding on to weight. So that is where we really have to start. And I find when people heal at the root cause, the weight does start to shift naturally without even needing to go into this deficit space. However, if a deficit is still needed, it is making sure you are eating whole real foods, which often, means we don't actually have to drop the deficit too low. And it is doing it over a slower, more controlled period of time, so
Mhm.
that you don't end up having to go from, say, 2,000 calories down to 1,400, right? And if we're starting to implement things like strength training, where you're building muscle, there's a lot of other ways we can support our basal metabolic rate or our metabolism, and the amount of fat we're burning at rest, other than just taking away more food. So, can we increase our strength training? Can we make sure we're hitting 7.5 to 10,000 steps a day to support the metabolism? Can we do other things other than just take food away? So,
Mhm.
to answer your question, slow, low, if it does need to be for an extended period of time, because some people have quite a bit of weight to shift, and that's a reality. That's okay, but do it in a nourishing way and putting whole real foods into your body predominantly, so that your body learns that it's safe to let go of the weight as well.
Could you? I'm interested in that sort of area of. I really like how you went to the root cause first, as opposed to just going on a calorie deficit, because it's such a blanket rule. Could you maybe explain that a little bit more in terms of people shifting weight without necessarily having to go into a calorie deficit? Like, what kind of scenarios would you see that in?
Okay, so I mean, this brings in that estrogen piece, I think, quite nicely that I know we were going to touch on. Um, for example, a lot of people will hold on to weight, particularly if we're thinking about women. Hips, thighs, maybe stomach, arms. Actually, to be honest, it's everywhere. But if we think about those kind of key areas around their hips and thighs, or even around their stomach and that, what can happen is if you experience constipation, if you have got a whole lot of toxin coming in, and when I say liver, most people kind of roll their eyes and go, well, I don't drink that much, or I just have one glass of wine at night, or I,
Yeah.
you know, alcohol is one of like
Yeah, I was gonna
20
say, just
vices.
because alcohol is so common in our like society, right?
Yeah, it's like there's so much that loads up the liver. So if we think about this from the root cause perspective and focus on this detoxification picture, we have three major detoxification phases. The first phase and the second phase both occur in the liver. The third phase is in your gut. I work backwards because if you can't physically clear the toxins out through passing
Mm,
a stool or a bowel movement, which is one of the key ways of getting rid of toxins, then you are going to let those toxins sit in your body. And so the way I like to think about it is if you've got your intestines and you imagine that that is a road. So you've got this windy road, which is your intestines. The stool, yes, we're talking about bowel movements. One of the perks of my job. The stool is like a bus traveling along that road. And inside the bus is a whole lot of passengers. Those are your toxins ready to be eliminated from the body. Now, what happens if those toxins, sorry, if the bus stops? Well, the passengers can get out. They can go for a walkabout. They can end up
mm,
roaming around wherever they want to go. And so, if that is the case, then those toxins go back into the bloodstream. The body doesn't want the toxins in the bloodstream, so it stores it into a fat cell. Similarly with the liver. So, the liver is phase one and two, which, if we've got toxins coming into the liver's job, is to process and filter your blood multiple times a day. So your blood is constantly, right now, as you're listening to this, your blood is being filtered by the liver. It doesn't matter if you're drinking or not, it's still filtering
still
you
goes
out.
through it. Yeah.
Yeah, the stuff you put on your skin has to be filtered. The air we're breathing has to be filtered. The food, everything you do that goes into your bloodstream has to be filtered by the liver. And so if we've got one pathway in and we've got six pathways now out, then that's phase two. We need to make sure that we're getting those toxins from phase one to phase two, then either to be excreted through the urine or through a bowel movement, essentially. Now, if there is a blockage at any point in any of the pathways out of the liver, so in phase two detoxification, which can happen because there's either too many toxins going in, there is, the right nutrients aren't being consumed, we're deficient in something, all sorts of things can cause that blockage or that backup system, right? Think about it as kind of like an airport runway where you've got too many planes trying to take off and they can't. And so what happens is then those toxins get let out what we think in term as a little trapdoor. If that toxin goes out the trapdoor, it's back in the bloodstream. We can't have it in the bloodstream because it's going to cause damage. It's a toxin. So it goes into a fat cell. And so where I see a lot of people have issues is either they're getting a lot of constipation, they don't even realize it's actual constipation because they're not clearing their bowels effectively, or they've got this liver issue where some of the where some of the pathways are blocked. And what ends up happening is you go to the gym or you're going for a walk or you're moving your body and you're eating well and you're like, cool. So you go mobilize these fat stores. These toxins get released. They go through the bloodstream and they either don't get all the way through the liver process or they wind up in the bowel and then they get reabsorbed back into the body.
Mm,
So in either case, you end up with these fat cells that are loaded with all these toxins because it's a protective mechanism that the body's trying to ensure and look after. And that's why people can't lose weight. And so when you get the gut healthy, when you get the liver doing its job effectively, when you make sure your lymphatic system, your toxin excretory system is working effectively, you can sweat better, you can get those toxins out. The weight tends to shift. So it doesn't have
Mm.
to be a calorie deficit.
Wow, that is so interesting. I've never heard it explained like that, and that makes so much sense. And I can also imagine, like, yep, it's being backed up, put back through the body, but then
Yeah.
that person is most likely still drinking or still consuming things that are like further emphasizing it. It's not just the stuff that's in there that's going back around; it's new inflammatory or toxins that are coming in as well.
But and to be honest with you, there's that component which is huge, but there are so many people that come and they're like, I've cleaned up so much of my life. Like they are just eating whole food. They've taken alcohol out or they've stopped some of the other things, but there are so many other endocrine disruptors, which are things that will load the liver. So endocrine system is your hormonal system. I like to call them liver loaders. But drinking from plastic bottles all day, every day, plastic containers, spraying perfume on yourself every single day, using a moisturizer with like a whole lot of synthetic stuffs and perfumes and fragrances and all sorts of things through it. All of that loads up your liver too. So you can be
Mm.
eating as clean as you want. You can be moving your body regularly and still be hitting these issues because there's other toxins going in that maybe there's been other ones in the past accumulating with these ones, and we end up hitting that roadblock.
Wow, that is so cool. There's another Huberman podcast I was listening to the other day, and he was talking about how things get absorbed through your scalp. And
Yeah,
like now, when I wash my hair, I'm thinking like, wow, how much of this shampoo is going into my body? So it's so interesting that you mentioned that stuff that you put on your skin. It
yeah,
obviously is getting a percentage of it is getting absorbed into the body and then transported and has to be filtered back out.
yeah. It's like a giant sponge, your skin.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah,
It's
yeah.
a filtration. It's an organ. People forget it's an organ. Like, I think they kinda
Mm.
just think it's like a case over
It's
our
like a
over our
wetsuit or
muscles.
something. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Now, you've mentioned it a few times, and it's a big piece that I'm sure you know lots about, and that's the gut. I feel
Mhm,
like in the past maybe 5 to 10 years, there's a lot more research coming out about the gut and how, like, oh, maybe the gut's like just as important as the brain is. Maybe even it's more important, in terms of
mhm.
our like emotional regulation and all that kind of thing. So, could you kind of give us a bit of an understanding as to what it's like if your gut isn't in a healthy place and what we might experience the symptoms like if our gut isn't healthy.